Is it time to reveal everything now? Yes, you're correct. What are you discussing? Exactly. That's why we decided to sort out the unnecessary baggage. What? I'm not quite sure I understand. Reportedly, after throwing the bag out of the car window, my parents' car drove away. 2 hours passed, and as it got dark around me, I trembled with fear. About 30 minutes later, a car appeared. Are you alone, Myra? Michelle has not gotten back to me. What took place? Grandma. Seeing my grandmother get out of the car, I felt relieved, and tears flowed. Seeing me suddenly cry, my grandmother was a bit shaken, but carefully helped me into the car and decided to go to my grandparents' house. In the car, I explained the situation to my grandmother as much as I could. What a statement! Why would someone say something like that? They stated it's time to get rid of unneeded baggage and that I'm just excess baggage in life. That isn't possible. When we arrived at my grandparents' house, I explained the situation to my grandfather as well. My granddad was obviously incensed. My grandma was upset as well. However, as soon as I mentioned a specific topic, their anger subsided, and their expressions quickly returned to normal. After exchanging glances, my grandparents started chatting softly to one another. Myra doesn't cause any trouble at all. You're protected, so don't worry. Where is the actual annoyance, I wonder? Will you assist us in telling them the truth? My grandmother's self-assured grin gave me comfort. I chose to assist my grandma even though I hadn't heard what we were going to begin yet. Myra is my name. I am a middle school student who has always used a wheelchair since I was born with a handicap that keeps me from walking. I have a neurological disorder that stops my legs from receiving nerve impulses. As someone who uses a wheelchair, I deal with a number of difficulties every day. One of my biggest challenges is a 4-inch step that my buddies can easily cross. That's the reason I usually stay indoors. It's just because my house is too cozy, not because I had bad experiences outside. How is it easier to handle than the previous doors? All right. Thank you indeed. Now, nearly all the doors in the house are sliding doors. Opening and closing doors can be a struggle when using a wheelchair. In addition, the bathroom's railings are rather ancient. We may soon have to replace them. I played by moving the freshly built door back and forth since I was pleased with it. My father was arranging tools that were strewn all over the floor next to me. As a result, the house has become so comfortable that it makes me reluctant to go out. If there's anything you're concerned about, don't hesitate to tell me. My father always encourages, but he has his own work, and it's hard to ask too much of him. Therefore, I have never specifically asked him to do something for me. Because I don't say anything, my father often proceeds with home improvements on his own, and every time he finishes, he tells me to speak up if there's any inconvenience, making me feel his kindness each time. However, no matter how much he scolds, I never ask my father for improvements. Part of the reason is that I don't want to trouble him, and also because my mother says the financial difficulties are because I need a wheelchair and I can't work, so don't insist on getting what you want. My mother often repeats, "We are poor." My mother's tough speech style made me realize this for the first time when I was in the first grade of elementary school. Even though my father works on construction projects, I am aware that there are costs associated with doors. Furthermore, he doesn't get paid for the house remodeling he conducts. I started to stop requesting improvements from my father when I first became aware of this fact in the upper years of elementary school. Despite this, the renovations my father pushed forward have made our home a very comfortable space for me. My mother, candidly speaking to me about our state of poverty, is also perhaps part of her way of ensuring that I grow up without relying on others. I believed that I was loved by my parents, but I realized that this belief was because I was still young and didn't understand anything. From around the upper grades of elementary school, I began to understand my parents' intentions a little at a time. I thought I was loved, but it seems that might not really be the case. I'll load this baggage here, so please handle that one. Make a tick. This is usually problematic and weighty. I'm sorry. After shopping at the mall, my mother packed the purchases into the trunk, while my father helped me into the car. To my parents, I was just another piece of baggage, like groceries or daily necessities. Sitting in the car, I disliked looking at my legs and turned my gaze outside. I didn't want to be treated as baggage, but I couldn't argue because I kept causing trouble at home. "Why are you in the hallway?" I asked. "You're blocking the path. This place is terribly little." "I was just trying to go to the bathroom." Inadequate timing. I always advise you to find out where we are and behave in a way that avoids disturbing us. I'm sorry. You're in the way whenever you move. I keep instructing you to be silent in the living room's corner. You're a really annoying burden. A cardboard box that is stationary might be more manageable. Despite wanting to go to the bathroom, I was cornered into the living room by my mother. Having to wait to go to the bathroom to avoid being called troublesome baggage again, I decided to distract myself by focusing on a TV show I wasn't even interested in. Understanding everything isn't always a good thing. As I reached the upper grades of elementary school, I began to see my parents' true feelings. At that age, their cold words were too much for me to bear. It stung every time my folks treated me like luggage. However, as a school-age child, I was dependent on my parents for support. Gradually, I started to gauge my parents' moods and tried to be as little of a nuisance as possible. "Are you not going anywhere again today?" "Yeah, I'll just watch TV at home." "That's a relief." From the doorway, I watched my parents go shopping. Usually, they come back toward the end of the evening play. Not wanting to be seen as a bother, I started avoiding going out with my parents and stayed home more. My parents would grin broadly when I chose not to go with them. I felt helpful when I saw their grins and would return the favor. In retrospect, I see how skewed my perspective was at the time. My main goal was to avoid being a bother, and I thought that my efforts were the reason my parents smiled. Do you use a wheelchair at home too, Myra? Yes, I do. However, my dad has made the house wheelchair accessible, so I don't require everyone's assistance as I do at school. I'm quite content to be at home by myself. My primary school class varied as the grades advanced. While some children showed no interest in my wheelchair, more people began to congregate during breaks. This became a new routine after the class change, and I was already accustomed to it. At this time, it seems I said something inappropriate to a friend. My friend relayed to a teacher how I was managing being home alone, which resulted in a call from the teacher to our home. If a sixth grader can't handle staying home alone, why should the school interfere? Exactly why did you mention being by yourself? It has created problems. However, as an alternative to me staying home alone, my mother gave me a new directive. Go to an after-school day service program. What's that? My mom showed me the facility's brochure. The leaflet had pictures of kids my age who were really focused on their studies or crafts. The after-school day service seemed to be a facility that provides essential life skills and opportunities for social interaction. Simply put, it's like a version of a childcare program or a day service for seniors, but tailored for individuals with disabilities. Honestly, it's expensive, and it's a burden to send you there. But as long as you use a wheelchair, your father and I can't support you forever. That's why I want you to make friends there, engage with others, and receive training so you can live independently in society. She probably just didn't want to keep me at home since I was a burden. Okay, I'll go to the facility after school and on weekends. I appreciate your understanding. It truly aids kids in comprehending and thinking more profoundly than adults sometimes believe. I pretended not to notice the real reason behind my mother's decision and continued to act as if I was unaware. My mother didn't realize I was acting and believed her words made me happy. Seeing my mother smiling, I felt a joy that I probably shouldn't have felt. But one day, my mother told me out of the blue, "You don't need to go to the facility anymore." With me spending less time at home, I had become less of a burden to them, making their life seem more comfortable. Really? You're already a middle school student, and staying home alone shouldn't be a problem. I had already been attending the facility for a year, where I made friends. On my mother's orders, I began attending there grudgingly, but the facility had grown to be significant to me because I was frequently treated like a bother at home. If it's feasible, I'd like to keep going there. Okay, I won't go to the facility anymore. But I had to grudgingly accept, as I couldn't resist my mother. I ended up staying in the corner of the room since I was in the way, and spent more time at home after I stopped going to the facility. At home, I started to feel like a bother. There were moments when I hoped I could return to the institution. I made the discreet decision to ask my mother if I could go back. I can't focus at home since I'm accustomed to studying at the facility. It's not a study space. The same everywhere? I pondered the current whereabouts of my buddies at the institution. How about getting in touch with them? I take it you shared contact information? If not, you might ask over the phone at the facility. It appeared from my mother's response that she had no intention of allowing me to return to the institution. Unusually, I told her that I wasn't happy with her answer. A few months later, my mother made a kind proposal, as if she could see my glum expression. "Myra, why don't you go out with your father and me today?" "Really? Where are we heading?" "It's a surprise." When we arrived, I thought that this was the happiest thing that had happened to me in my 13 years. In the car, a big bag filled with something was put on my lap. "What's inside this?" "Oh no, don't open it just yet. It adds to the enjoyment." When we got there, "Sorry, I won't open it so you can relax." My father, who was driving, abruptly turned around and loudly halted me as soon as I attempted to open the bag. My father's harsh voice startled me, so I immediately apologized. I eagerly took in the view outside the window as the car began to move, wondering where we were heading. I discovered we were going to my maternal grandparents' place after an hour or so of driving. My enthusiasm increased because we rarely get to see my grandparents once a year, and it had been almost 3 years since our last visit. There was a rest station with a sizable parking lot where a small store was erected up along the mountain route that led to my grandparents' property. My father chose to pull over at the rest area since he was tired from driving and let me get out of the car while he went to the store to get juice. My parents appeared to be having a conversation about something. Mom just got a sudden urgent matter, and it looks like we'll be quite late. That is problematic. I desired to return early. "I take it we're heading to Grandma's house? Are we going to meet here?" "Oh, Myra, you've already returned. Don't shock me in that manner." My parents were astonished for a minute when I spoke to them, but then they went back to being serious and said something startling. "Is it time to reveal everything now?" "Yes, that's right." "What are you discussing? Is that the secret you said before to our departure?" "Exactly. You're just extra baggage in our life, don't you think?" That's why we've decided it's time to sort out the unnecessary baggage." "What? What do you say? Hold on a second." My parents got back in the car and left me behind as I was still trying to make sense of what was happening. Hold on. Amazingly, I followed the automobile as it drove off, but to no use. But as the automobile came to a halt a little distance ahead, my frantic screams appeared to reach them. I paused my approach, relieved. However, my mother leaned out the window and gave me a final goodbye as I approached. "Take care, then overcome your challenges and live well," she murmured, As the car sped away after she threw the bag out the window, I was left alone in the mountains for a while, too horrified to move. I eventually realized that it wouldn't help to stand motionless, so I moved in the direction of the bag my mother had tossed. I picked up the bag, opened it, and saw that it was filled with clothing with an envelope on top. There was probably a note in the mail, but I was too weak to read any correspondence from my parents at the time. I saw that it was already late, and that twilight was approaching as I looked at a clock at the rest stop. My smartphone was in the car, and I wanted to contact for assistance. I finally made the decision to wait for my grandma in front of the vending machine. After 2 hours, I shuddered in terror as the darkness encroached around me. Waves of unfathomable worry were brought on by rustling noises coming from the bushes, maybe due to the wind. The vending machine's light was the sole reassuring presence at the moment. After another half hour, a vehicle arrived at the parking lot. "Myra, are you alone? Michelle has not gotten back to me. What took place?" "Grandma." I was so relieved to see my mother, my grandma, come out of the car that I started crying uncontrollably. Despite being a little startled, my grandma assisted me into the car when she saw me start crying and made the decision to go to her house. I told my grandparents everything that had transpired as we drove to their home. It feels like my parents have given up on parenting me. To abandon a child in the mountains. What? Is it possible for something so horrible to occur? When my parents first abandoned me, I had responded similarly to my grandma, but that's what actually transpired. What a statement. Why would someone say something like that? They stated it's time to get rid of unneeded baggage and that I'm simply excess baggage in life. That isn't possible. Yes, a letter was present. I gave the mail to my grandma since I didn't yet have the guts to read it. Without delay, she parked the car and started reading the letter. What does it say? It's written very politely that they can't afford to raise you for financial reasons, and they're asking if we could take care of you for just a little while. According to the letter, they asked us to take care of you for 3 days since Louis had to go on a business trip today, and Michelle had to go with him. However, it appears that they intended to keep you here for a lot longer. Where did you find the letter? It was in the bag. I understand. They hoped you would discover the letter after you got to our house since they didn't want to be questioned. For this reason, they planned for it to show up after tending to Myra. You were reprimanded for attempting to unzip the bag because that was their goal. My grandmother's conjectures appeared to be spot right. She knows my mother as well as her daughter does. When we got to my grandparents' house, my grandma told my papa everything. My grandfather was incensed when he heard it and said, "What a horrible thing. You don't have to return there, Myra. You will be here indefinitely. I will never return you to them." My grandfather's fury struck me as genuine devotion. It was quite different from how I felt when I believed my parents loved me. I now see how foolish it was for me to try to avoid becoming a burden to my parents. I had the impression that my parents' curse had been removed. Too much happened on a day that was taxing. I didn't even eat supper when I got to my grandparents' place before falling asleep. Feeling a little more at ease the next evening, I discussed my life with my parents with my grandparents. It wasn't the first time they'd been dubbed luggage. Why did they say such a horrible thing yesterday? Really? They instructed you to simply sit in a quiet area. What were they thinking? Every time I discussed my parents' behavior, my grandparents' faces quickly became crimson with rage. My grandfather spilled the tea as he angrily slapped the table. That my grandparents were as angry with my parents as I was made me feel a weird sort of happiness. I believed I could safely accept this as it was distinct from how I felt about my parents. But as soon as I brought up a particular fact, their rage vanished and their faces became more composed. I had been visiting the facility for a full year, so I was rather taken aback when they informed me not to return. A year at the facility? Yes, it was like an after-school program. I, yes, I was going almost every day. Is there something wrong? My grandparents exchanged glances and started whispering when they heard this. They appeared to think my narrative was a little strange. I was able to grasp their explanations as a middle school student. I was no longer able to consider my parents to be parents after hearing their justification. I was only an inconvenient accessory, or what my folks termed luggage. You are not at all a bother, Myra. You're safe. Don't worry. Where is the actual annoyance, I wonder? Will you assist us in telling them the truth? I was reassured by my grandmother's self-assured smile. I had already made the decision to work with my grandma, even though I hadn't heard the details of the plan yet. I had been at my grandparents' place for 3 weeks, and I was starting to adjust to life here. My grandparents had taken today off from work, so we were all sitting around drinking tea. I was enjoying the tea's warmth and wondering if my quiet existence would last when a loud voice came from the front door. We were in the living room when the voice slowly made its way over. "Hello, are you present? What have you done?" We were seated in the living room when my parents stormed in and began yelling vehemently. They had a hard time finding the correct words since they were so angry. Their expressions were a mixture of fright and rage, verging on insanity. My grandparents and I were fully aware of their condition, so we continued to drink our tea in peace and quiet without being bothered. But my mother's rage grew, and she reprimanded us even more angrily than before. "We're going to have a lot of problems because of this. How will you respond to this?" "Stay silent. Even without the yelling, we can hear you." My parents were surprised, staring at me with wide eyes, as they didn't think I would order them to shut up. In sharp contrast to who I was when I lived with my parents, I was now able to express my opinions freely since I was no longer under their authority. "Grandma, what is the current situation with Mom and Dad? Your behavior has created issues. The city office called to inquire as to whether Myra was still residing with us. The falsehood was quickly uncovered. Although nothing particular was spoken over the phone at the time, this will undoubtedly cause issues." "Yes, that will be an issue. An inquiry into bogus benefits is probably underway. It will ultimately surface even if we don't do anything about it." "Why do you know about the fraudulent benefits, Mom?" Although I was aware that fake benefits were an issue, as a middle school student, I did not completely comprehend the seriousness of the situation. Even though it wasn't too hot, my parents had beads of perspiration on their foreheads. Lewis had come to borrow money from us before because his job wasn't going well. "Remember, you said you didn't want to work and wanted to continue being a housewife, so we told him to get a job and turned him away." "Yes, I remember that happened." It appears that they were indeed in a terrible financial condition, but I had always assumed my mother had stated we were poor to prevent me from being pampered or requesting too much. My grandma had noticed some wrongdoing on the part of my parents. "If you were poor, why did you continue to send Myra to the facility each day? Doesn't that institution charge more than $10 every visit?" "Yes, we were struggling financially, so we kept sending Myra to the facility to help her develop social skills. But be honest, didn't you send Myra to the institution only to make your own life easier? You gave up after a year due to financial difficulties, correct?" "Yes, we ran out of funds and couldn't continue with the facility." "Is there a problem with that?" "Something is wrong. You kept acting like Myra was attending to get disability service payments even after she stopped visiting the institution, correct?" Grandma was right on the money. My mother attempted to respond, but she was at a loss for words. The institution I visited charged little more than $10 each visit. Grandma stated that the subsidy, which is the user's responsibility, is meant to pay the majority of this expense. By fabricating my attendance at the facility, my parents had been obtaining these monies falsely. You presumably believed there was no reason to keep Myra at home because you could still collect the disability benefits without really sending her to the institution, even if she wasn't attending. You saved yourself the effort and still got the money by leaving her with us. You usually choose the easy route, which is characteristic of you. So that's why you prompted the office to investigate us. Not straight. No, Myra, who is meant to be with her parents, is actually here with us. I just went to the local office to report this. They thus looked into whether my parents were getting benefits that they shouldn't have. You were approached for that reason. It occurred as a result of effective communication between your area's office and our local office. How can you read my thoughts so easily? How long have I been a mother, in your opinion? A true mother is able to read her child's mind. It makes sense that you're perplexed. You can't relate to Myra's emotions because you haven't been behaving like a real mother. As soon as I heard Grandma's comments, I understood what genuine motherhood looked like. Grandma's statement so stunned my mother that she immediately passed out. Grandpa was now standing in front of my father, who was still upright. You two look quite elegant today. Louis, that watch seems really good, and Michelle is toting a fancy purse. Did you use the funds from the false benefits to purchase those? No, this was bought with my own money. Oh, weren't you impoverished prior to the false allegations? You could buy pricey clothes if you had the money. You couldn't have been spending Myra's disability and child support benefits as cash. Actually, I bought this watch recently and the clothes were a stretch to afford. Even as a middle schooler, I could see the weak reasons. Grandpa decided to let me land the last blow after giving me a smile. Dad, don't you own many items of apparel bearing the same logo? Not just clothing, however. You also own a lot of pricey footwear. And you have a ton of clothing in your closet, Mom. Dad was unable to reply and, like Mom, he finally passed out. I had assumed that Mom's remarks about our poverty were a part of my upbringing, but in actuality, they were enjoying many comforts. My parents had been extravagant on many occasions. They desired. When I was little and couldn't acquire a toy I wanted, I recall having a tantrum. I never questioned that it was a type of schooling intended to restrict my need and selfishness, since that occurrence led my mother to begin claiming that we were impoverished. In actuality, though, my parents were just taking advantage of the advantages that came with my presence for themselves. My presence was, in a sense, what kept our home afloat. My parents themselves were the true hardship. We were entirely to blame. I'm very sorry, Myra. I will be a real mommy from now on. Let's head home together then. My mother seemed to have a change of heart and apologized to me while crying. I may have been duped and taken her word for it if it had been the previous me. So you think if we go to the office together and testify that we're living together without any problems, the investigation might be halted, and we might be saved by that last hope? As a middle schooler, how can you possess such a strong foundation of knowledge? I assumed you would simply comply as normal. To be honest, I hadn't given it much thought myself. Grandma's warning was the reason for it. Be mindful that your parents may attempt to drag you back under false pretenses, particularly if they ask you to go to the office with them. There might be a plot underneath it. There is no longer any necessity for me to accompany you, as I have already informed the office of all pertinent information. I will not alter my account, and will be true to the facts, even if questioned. If you come along, please help us. Perhaps there is a way to save us. Will you truly leave your parents behind? You already have enough heartlessness. After abandoning Myra in the mountains, are you now requesting her assistance with your false claims? You only ask for assistance when you're having problems. Isn't that a bit bold? My parents infuriated my grandparents, who attempted to evict them from the house. But my parents were too young to be swayed by my old grandparents alone. I was unable to physically help my grandparents since I was in a wheelchair, so I simply gave them a chilly look. My parents abruptly relaxed and left my grandparents' house after noticing my stare. My grandparents and I drank a freshly prepared cup of tea and continued our quiet weekend after my parents had left. My parents were ultimately taken into custody for accepting benefits falsely. They had also been abusing funding, according to additional inquiry. Grants were meant to pay up to 2/3 of the price of my father's renovations to make our house more accessible for me. It was found that he had utilized the additional grant funds for personal needs, while inflating the true price of the construction projects through his construction company. It turned out that my father was only generating additional money, even though I had thought he was hard at work improving our home. About $50,000 was the entire amount of money that was gained falsely. It is illegal to get benefits fraudulently, and I was warned that failure to refund this money might result in criminal prosecution. Even though I found it difficult to understand the size of this figure, it is a substantial amount for my parents, who are struggling financially. Although they were able to collect the funds and make the return, they still owe a significant amount because it was borrowed. The crime still exists even after the money was returned. Although they were placed on probation rather than going to jail, they still run the potential of being locked up in the future. I had assumed that the term criminals only applied to those incarcerated, but my grandma clarified that my parents are now legally considered criminals because they were found guilty. Due to their recognition as criminals, they were unable to gain social trust, which forced my father to shut down his construction company. My parents have been looking for work ever then, but they haven't been able to find steady work because of the stigma associated with being criminals. At the moment, they are working day jobs to make ends meet while trying to pay off their debt. I've begun living with my grandparents, and we've formally formed a family. It appears that precautions have been made to prevent my parents from receiving the grants and perks I get. I am really thankful to be able to live with my loving and supportive grandparents, even if I am not familiar with the financial specifics. I've also begun adjusting to my new school, and I intend to go forth on my own without concern from my parents.